At this point, the phrase, "there is no ethical consumption under capitalism," is basically a leftist meme. The intentions are to point out that all products have been made using, at the very least, labor where workers were paid a wage which does not match the true value of what they produce, and likely a variety of resources used solely to profit an industry. Therefore, all products you buy contain the exploitation of workers, animals, or the environment to some degree. Personally, I most often hear this brought up when someone, perhaps an environmentalist, perhaps a vegan, or other activists, request people stop buying something, and someone will reply that there isn't any way to consume ethically under capitalism. Now, lay epic, "there is no ethical consumption under capitalism" might be a useful line of thought in some conversations, but when it comes to discussing what an individual should do, it's pretty useless. Let's take this analog conversation. "This politician is so corrupt, we should vote him out." Well, there are no perfect democracies, are there? But can't you change your voting to make a positive impact here? "Look, the system is so broken, and you trying to put the blame on me for not voting this politician out of office instead of the avenues that allowed him to join in the first place is—" Stop! This isn't Twitter, this is my YouTube channel, and I get to choose the tone of debate. Clearly the problem in the above conversation comes from person two's knowledge that nothing can be perfect, warping into a feeling that there's no point in trying as an individual to make things better. This isn't true. Individual effort can translate into meaningful change. Boycotts can work, voting does affect policy, volunteering can make things better. But how much can we expect the individual to do? Well, that's what I'm here to analyze today. Part 1. The issues. I'm going to talk about some of the issues where people are most often confronted with their personal choices and if they should change their actions, starting with fast fashion. It's really no secret that the increasing speed at which clothes are manufactured, shipped, sold, and thrown away has very dark secrets in the supply chain. Fast fashion describes the way fashion companies now produce large amounts of garments very quickly, expecting them to be either worn a few times and thrown away, or just kept in the back of a closet. This has resulted in vastly cheaper clothing prices, as well as considerably more waste. However, the biggest cost, in my view, is the treatment of those producing the clothes. Despite many promises otherwise, just about every single top fashion brand has been found being supplied by underpaid or abused workers in poor conditions, deep within developing countries. I originally thought I'd just name the bad brands here, but when I did some basic research, every single major fast fashion brand I could think of had very serious labor rights violations. That's not to say some aren't worse than others, but it's safe to say that if you buy from Zara, H&M, The Gap, Topshop, Urban Outfitters, or literally any other of these companies, you are probably purchasing the fruits of this exploitation. Now, this is the time that a surface analysis of this problem would point the finger at one of these companies and demand they change the abusive factory. At this point, the company would cut ties with the offending factory, say they care deeply about the rights of workers, and carry on. However, no matter how often companies seem to do this, it happens again and again. How? Well, I used to imagine fashion production was very streamlined. Topshop buys cotton from a cotton farm, sends that to the Topshop factory, which is then turned into Topshop clothes and gets put into Topshop shops. It's not like that. Really, once a design has been made, buyers for the fashion companies, those who scout out factories, look for factories to give contracts for the manufacture. Once they found one, the factory then buys materials from its suppliers, which workers then turn into clothes. In this way, Topshop really doesn't know what's happening in its factories. They don't know where the factories buy cotton from, what working conditions are like, how much people are paid. The best a company can do at this point is audits, which are often insufficient and infrequent by design and can't identify labor rights violations. Here, the production of clothing seems to, as much as possible, slide ethical responsibility down the supply chain. You can't be held responsible for something you didn't know was happening, right? So their best strategy has traditionally been to confuse the supply line and make it so they can enjoy cheap labor without facing the consequences. But why not just, not hire the bad factories? It's important here to remember that fast fashion companies hate being seen as exploitative. Boycotts really hurt their bottom line. And there are ethically branded companies that do have transparency in their supply chain and almost none of the labor rights abuses that plague fast fashion. Why can't it all be like that? Well, simply put, we have this exploitation because Westerners expect a t-shirt to be $5, not $20, and a $5 shirt means that there's never going to be enough money to pay workers. This, of course, isn't the consumer's fault. Companies artificially lowered prices at the expense of those making their products, and now any major company that breaks with this practice is outcompeted. That's just how capitalism works. If you can get an edge by underpaying workers and no one gives a damn, then you will make more money. Animal rights. This one tends to make people uncomfortable, but we're all at least vaguely aware that the animals we eat didn't live happy lives on farms, did they? Over 99% of animals live their whole lives on factory farms. It's kind of hard to comprehend this, but if you consume animal products and don't know where they come from, as in the literal farm, you can be just about sure the animal came from a factory farm. This means every time you eat fast food, a muffin, an omelet, cheese, butter, pizza, you're paying for products that were made unethically. I know a lot of people think they consume humane free-range eggs and grass-fed beef, but these labels often don't mean much and make up a really small percentage of the animal products they actually consume. The cows you see on the side of the road, the chicken your friend has in their backyard, the pig you pet at your uncle's farm, these animals really don't make up your diet. In reality, they probably represent almost none of it. Peter Singer, who literally wrote the book on animal liberation, argues that if you're going to feel like an ethical person, you do have a moral obligation to not buy animal products you know were made unethically. Singer bases his assessment of factory farming largely on industry descriptions of how these products are made. For example, much beloved bacon is produced in the wombs of sows who live largely like this. They are closely confined for both pregnancy and birth. While pregnant, they are usually locked into metal stalls that are 2 feet wide and 6 feet long, or scarcely bigger than the sow herself. Or they may be chained by a collar around the neck, or they may be in stalls yet still chained. There they will live for 2 to 3 months. During all that time, they will be unable to walk more than a single step forward or backward, or to turn around, or to exercise in any other way. This is the industry standard. This is your bacon. A lot of people really don't understand how dairy works, but just like humans, dairy cows produce milk for their children, and only after they've given birth. Therefore, to mass-produce dairy, dairy cows must be continually impregnated over and over again their entire lives to keep producing milk, and separated from their baby so that the milk can be collected. The calves are then either killed immediately or raised for veal if they're male, or put back into dairy farming if they're female. That's your cheese pizza. Again, however, meat and dairy producers don't want to be seen as animal abusers, and there are ways to raise animals without causing this type of suffering. However, it's not possible to produce the quantity of meat we do for the prices we get without abusing animals, just like how it's not possible to get the quantity of clothes we get for the prices we get without abusing workers. Part 2. What do we do about this as individuals? The authors I've cited so far, Lucy Siegel and Peter Singer, both argue that individuals should stop buying products they know to be unethical. They argue that it brings out not only more personal fulfillment, but also can actively change the way companies act. This seems to check out. As Lucy Siegel notes, major brands have tried to be more transparent and have introduced audits to their factories. But more importantly, public willingness to pay for fair trade products and ethical clothing fibers fuels brands that do not have such heavy ethical and environmental impacts. For animal rights, some countries have banned gestation crates for sows after public outrage, and veganism has exploded in recent years, with plant-based milks, meats, cheeses, and other vegan products becoming more and more mainstream, all because the public decided they wanted to change their purchasing habits for ethical reasons. So the choices you make as an individual do change the world for the better. But is this actually important? Part 3. Collective versus individual action. A lot of political YouTubers argue that framing issues like climate change, animal rights, labor rights, etc. as issues of personal choice is kind of gross and inaccurate. It does shift the blame from the companies that abuse the customers to those who buy without knowing any better. For example, the beautiful, talented, wonderful YouTuber H-Bomber Guy says in his video about climate change,
Linked in the description is a great video by Simon Clark, a science YouTuber getting a PhD in climate physics, talking about what we ought to be looking into to deal with climate change. His suggestions take place on the level of what sources we use for power and changes in legislation of businesses whose actions directly affect the climate. I think this is important to recognize because I find a lot of people tend to embrace more personal solutions, like driving a more efficient car or using public transport or going vegan and so on, and it has to be acknowledged that these personal choices aren't the primary driver of climate problems in the first place. The wider policies are. It's very easy to give in to the idea that the solution lies in you reducing your personal emissions to create a sense of control and doing your part for this big and scary thing, but that effort maybe ought to be spent fighting to get the big things done, getting people thinking and providing support for meaningful changes.
Basically just don't make it personal. Climate change isn't your fault. It's the Koch brothers' fault.
Now, this of course isn't a call out of H-Bomber Guy, who is lovely, but here he does imply that personal efforts are basically useless and you shouldn't invest in them for larger issues. That effort should better be invested elsewhere. And I agree, you didn't cause climate change by eating at McDonald's or driving a pickup truck, and even if everyone went vegan or stopped driving cars or whatever, it wouldn't fix climate change. We need collective action and wider policies and regulation. And it is gross of oil companies to blame consumers for the oil companies' reckless destruction of our planet. However, H-Bomber Guy fails to see the importance of the individual's contribution to boycotts, as well as real effects an individual can have on the world. If one person decides not to buy an inefficient car because of carbon concerns, that reduces the demand for that type of car. If 100,000 people make the same choice, that's taking a significant chunk out of carbon emissions, as well as reducing the power of car companies that want to lobby against climate regulations. If enough people boycott something and call their representatives about it, it's way more likely that it'll face regulation in the future. The line between purchasing choices, politics, and collective action is easily blurred. The buying choices you make impact companies and politics. Supporting alternatives to the status quo financially gives companies a chance to compete with the ones that already exist. So when you're talking about what you can do to help climate change or any other wider social issue, personal choices are important. So is collective action. To have the maximum impact, you need to do both. Part 4. Do I have to? I've assumed that everyone watching generally wants to do the right thing for the greater world. No one wants to think of themselves as eating abused animals or buying clothes from sweatshops or producing a disproportionate amount of carbon emissions. I'd say if you're of that moral persuasion, as in you want to make the world a better place in regards to issues you care about, you're somewhat obligated to put your money where your mouth is. That means, first off, not paying companies to do things you find unethical. Often, in an increasingly global world, this is the only way to change things. For example, with fast fashion, governments can't hold major brands accountable because the violations occur overseas. Therefore, literally the only thing you can do to help is hurting companies on their bottom line. Whenever practical, however, advocating for political change and regulation will be more effective, and it's essential in tackling systemic issues. And now that I've said the individual has some obligation to change their purchasing habits, I know I'm going to get people telling me that not everyone has the resources to go vegan or buy a Tesla or buy fair trade or whatever, and I fully acknowledge that every individual is in a different place and has a different ability to contribute. Therefore, your individual contribution should be proportionate to what you can feasibly do without altering your life. And using the fact that people are in different places to justify not doing anything yourself is pretty disingenuous. But back to the question, do you have to? And secondarily, where's the line? So if I believe in animal rights, maybe I have to stop eating veal. But do I have to stop having pets? Make sure the fields where I get my soy don't contain field mice? Stop lions from eating gazelles? Well, no, some actions aren't reasonable. Some are. If you can help a cause by making a change in your life or investing time or energy into something greater than yourself, you probably should. But the average person has no obligation to invest 100% of their time in anything. That would be crazy, and it would make people unhappy to invest so much energy into other things. Basically, use common sense for what you should and shouldn't do, but don't shun your social responsibility just because you can't do everything. Part 5. What if I don't care? And now for the elephant in the room. What if you literally don't care? You've done some reflection and realized that deep down, you don't really care about climate change, animal rights, or those poor people on the other side of the world that work 14-hour days. You're really more concerned with the things around you. Well, video over for you. Social responsibility as a concept relies on people taking an interest in the rights of those around them, beyond their sense of self. Ayn Rand is not socially responsible. So if you don't care, well, then you don't have any responsibility. But for the rest of us, making the world better involves taking as active a role in it as you can. That will differ on who and where you are, but whether you're calling your congressperson or having a meatless Monday, you can and probably should lend a hand. Thank you for watching.